a beautiful girl, became the target of obsessive pursuit by three wealthy brothers, but not long afterward, the girl suddenly vanished without a trace, and when she was finally found, she was frozen solid like an ice sculpture, lying in the snow while clutching a bouquet of white roses. The story begins at a resort hotel. That day, Miyuki had just stepped into the freezer storage room when she immediately noticed something incredibly strange. Inside the cold storage, which was normally kept under strict sanitary control, there were suddenly countless white roses scattered everywhere. Following the trail with her eyes, Miyuki suddenly noticed a human-sized wrapped package lying deep inside the room, and inside the package was an actual human body. The horrifying sight instantly caused Miyuki to scream in terror. Very quickly, the young detective Hajime rushed over after hearing her scream. The moment everyone saw the scene inside the freezer, their faces filled with fear and unease. Just then, Hajime noticed a note resting on the victim's chest. Written on it were the words, "Death Angel." The appearance of those words immediately pulled Hajime's thoughts back to the events shortly before the murder. With Valentine's Day approaching, Hajime had come to this resort hotel with Miyuki for a vacation. The hotel belonged to a friend of Inspector Isamu. The resort itself was enormous. According to the map, besides the main hotel building, there were also 10 smaller lodges surrounding the property. Since Hajime had been introduced by Isamu, the hotel owner Aoyama allowed him to stay free of charge. But although the room was free, Hajime was expected to work around the hotel in exchange. Naturally, this left Hajime extremely dissatisfied. Right as Hajime was complaining, 3 new guests arrived at the hotel. To his surprise, not only were the 3 men incredibly rude, one of them even acted overly familiar with Miyuki. Later on, Hajime learned from Aoyama that the 3 brothers who had checked in were famous wealthy heirs in the area. The oldest was Yusuke, the second brother was Kujiro, and the youngest, still a student, was Takuya. Every year around Valentine's Day, the brothers would invite different women to stay with them at the resort, and this year was no exception. Out of the 3 girls they had invited, 2 had already arrived. One was the sweet-looking Mizuho, the other was a more mature woman named Kaoru. Just then, Takuya suddenly asked Aoyama whether there was any information about the third girl, since they had only communicated online. The only thing he knew about her was her screen name, White Angel. Hearing that, Aoyama suddenly remembered something. Earlier that day, a package had arrived at the hotel, but the sender's name wasn't White Angel. Instead, it was signed, Death Angel. The moment Takuya heard that, his expression darkened with anger. He immediately rushed forward and tore open the package. Inside, there was only a single photograph, but the moment the 3 brothers and Aoyama saw the innocent-looking girl in the photo, their faces instantly filled with terror. The girl in the picture, Shizuka, had already died 2.5 years ago. Looking at the threatening message written on the photo, Takuya furiously slammed the package onto the floor, but unexpectedly, a creepy angel doll fell out from inside, letting out an eerie cackling laugh. The horrifying sight sent chills down everyone's spine, and at that moment, Hajime realized that Shizuka's death must have hidden a far darker truth. Wanting to uncover what really happened, Hajime later approached Aoyama alone and asked him about Shizuka. Unexpectedly, he learned that before her death, Shizuka had been Aoyama's only employee. She was incredibly beautiful, but instead of bringing her happiness, that beauty became the source of her nightmare. One day, the 3 brothers arrived at the resort for vacation as usual. Before long, they became fixated on the youthful and beautiful Shizuka. The brothers tried everything they could to pursue her relentlessly, and after that, Aoyama completely lost contact with her. Another year passed. One day, Aoyama finally called Shizuka's number, but instead of hearing her voice, the person who answered was Takuya. He coldly informed Aoyama that Shizuka was already dead, and if Aoyama wanted to find her, he should go search the snowy mountain behind the resort. After hearing the shocking news, Aoyama immediately rushed to the mountain, but after searching everywhere, he found nothing. Just as he was about to give up and leave, he suddenly spotted a figure lying deep within the forest. When Aoyama ran over, he discovered Shizuka lying silently in the snow, holding white roses in her hands, looking almost like a fallen white angel. Thinking back on all of this, Hajime finally realized something. The way Takuya's body had been frozen to death inside the freezer was exactly the same as how Shizuka had been found years ago. It was obvious now, someone was carrying out revenge against the 3 brothers. As the eldest brother, Yusuke showed not the slightest bit of grief over Takuya's death. Instead, he remained strangely calm. A moment later, he suddenly told Miyuki that he was the one who killed Takuya, and asked her to relay that information to everyone else. Miyuki was stunned after hearing this. She was just about to go inform the others when Yusuk's phone suddenly rang. Miyuki quickly hid around the corner, planning to secretly listen to the conversation, but unexpectedly, after answering the call, Yusuk didn't say a single word. Instead, he immediately hung up and rushed out of the hotel. Seeing this, Miyuki hurried after him, following the footprints in the snow. She tracked him all the way into the forest, but by the time she arrived, Yusuk had already disappeared. Miyuki instinctively tried to check the time, only to realize that her watch was missing, so she decided to head back the way she came. But just then, she suddenly spotted Yusuk again. She immediately chased after him, only for someone to suddenly appear and knock her unconscious. At the same time, the police finally arrived at the hotel. While they were examining the scene, the phone suddenly rang. The moment Hajime answered it, he realized the caller was Yusuk. Yusuk claimed that he was being held captive, and that he was trapped inside room 104. Mizuho immediately tried to ask for more details, but the call was abruptly disconnected the moment she took the phone. Just then, Inspector Nagashima asked where room 104 was located. Looking in the direction Aoyama pointed, Mizuho added that there was a glowing Christmas tree standing in front of room 104. To prevent another tragedy from happening, Hajime instructed all the women to stay behind, while every man immediately headed toward room 104. Once they arrived, they quickly discovered that the inside of the lodge was in complete disarray. As everyone stood there in shock, Hajime suddenly noticed something strange. There were clearly footprints outside the lodge, yet there were none inside. At that moment, Aoyama noticed drag marks on the floor, and those marks extended all the way outside. The group immediately followed the trail and began searching throughout the forest, but after searching for quite some time, they still couldn't find Yusuk. Instead, they unexpectedly found the unconscious Miyuki. Hajime immediately rushed over and helped her up. After confirming that Miyuki was unharmed, Hajime carried her on his back toward the nearest lodge, room 106. Before long, they arrived at the lodge entrance, but strangely, the moment Hajime opened the door, he realized there was light coming from inside room 106. Despite the room supposedly being vacant, he immediately stepped inside, and only then did he realize that the source of the light was a string of decorative lights wrapped around Yusuk's body. At that point, Yusuk was already dead, and just like Takuya, there was also a note attached to his body that read, "Death Angel." The next day, Hajime met with Inspector Nagashima. Nagashima explained the results of the investigation. First, regarding Takuya's case, he had not actually frozen to death. Instead, he had been beaten to death by the killer before his body was placed inside the freezer. Based on the estimated time the body was discovered, which was after 4:30 in the afternoon, Nagashima concluded that the killer most likely moved the body between 4 o'clock and 4:30 p.m. However, during that time, everyone staying at the hotel had an alibi. In addition to that, the police had also discovered a suicide note inside Takuya's luggage. But surprisingly, the note wasn't written by Takuya. It had been written by Shizuka, who had died 2 years earlier. Just as Hajime was examining the note, a police officer approached with a troubled expression. Since Yusuk had severed ties with his family, his relatives had refused to claim his body. In other words, out of the 3 brothers, the only remaining heir to the family fortune was the second brother Kujiro. After hearing this, Hajime returned to the main hotel building. While reviewing the details of the case, he accidentally noticed that the hotel's telephone line had somehow been unplugged. Just then, Miyuki came over and mentioned something strange. The watch she had lost in the forest had mysteriously appeared beside her pillow that morning. Jokingly, Miyuki said that maybe the killer had picked it up and secretly returned it to her. But those casual words instantly made Hajime realize the truth. He immediately gathered everyone inside room 106. Then, he began explaining his deduction. This entire case is an act of revenge targeting the 3 brothers, and the killer is extremely clever because Yusuk was not murdered in room 104. He was killed right here, inside room 106. Hearing this, Aoyama looked completely confused. After all, they had all personally witnessed the chaos inside room 104, and before his death, Yusuk himself had clearly stated that he was in room 104, but Hajime calmly replied That was all part of the killer's illusion. All of the small lodges here have identical interiors, which means the landmarks outside the lodges become extremely important. There's a large Christmas tree standing in front of room 104. The three brothers had stayed here many times before, so they naturally already knew that, and the killer took advantage of exactly that fact. Before carrying out the murder, the killer secretly wrapped decorative lights around the utility pole outside. That way, when Yusuk regained consciousness, he would subconsciously look through the fogged-up window and mistake the glowing utility pole for the Christmas tree. And because of that, he believed he was inside room 104. Even though the killer had planned everything so carefully, one careless remark still exposed her in the end. And then, Hajime revealed that the true culprit was Mizuho. The moment those words left Hajime's mouth, everyone present froze in shock. Seeing their reactions, Hajime calmly began to explain. Back when Hajime answered the phone call from Yusuk, the moment Mizuho rushed to grab the phone herself, Hajime had already started to suspect her, because it was at that exact moment that Mizuho secretly unplugged the hotel's phone line, and the reason she did that was to prevent Yusuk from calling again. Hajime explained that this was only one flaw in her plan. The more important mistake was something Mizuho herself had said earlier. She had specifically mentioned that there was a glowing Christmas tree in front of Lodge 104. A Christmas tree glowing with lights would normally sound perfectly natural, but what Mizuho didn't know was that before the murder happened, Hajime had been too lazy to decorate the tree and had never actually put the lights on it, which meant anyone who claimed the Christmas tree was glowing could only be the real killer. And on top of that, there was another decisive piece of evidence: the confetti. After everyone rushed toward Lodge 104, Mizuho immediately headed to Lodge 106. After murdering Yusuk there, she quickly staged the crime scene using confetti and decorative lights. And during the process, in order to avoid leaving footprints, she had taken off her shoes. But everyone knows that confetti sticks very easily, so while Mizuho was arranging the scene, some pieces inevitably stuck to her feet. All she had to do was take off her shoes, and the truth would be exposed. At that moment, Mizuho was already panicking inside, but she still clung to a final shred of hope and slowly removed her shoes. And just as Hajime predicted, a small piece of confetti gently fell out onto the floor. Seeing this, Mizuho finally gave up trying to deny it. Lowering her head, she admitted everything. The reason she committed these murders was to avenge Shizuka. But before she could continue, Kaoru suddenly stepped in front of her protectively. Furiously, she shouted that everything was the three brothers' fault. Kaoru's reaction only made Hajime even more certain that her relationship with Mizuho was far from ordinary. There was also another suspicious detail. Miyuki's watch had never actually been lost in the forest. It had been dropped inside the freezer, and engraved on the watch was Miyuki's initial, M. Coincidentally, Mizuho's name also began with the letter M, and by sheer coincidence, Kaoru had accidentally found the watch. Because of that, Kaoru mistakenly believed the watch was evidence that could expose Mizuho, so she secretly hid it away. After hearing all this, Inspector Nagashima concluded that the two women must have worked together to kill the brothers, but Hajime immediately denied that theory, because from beginning to end, Kaoru had a solid alibi, and judging from the fact that she later returned the watch to Miyuki, Kaoru had most likely tried to stop Mizuho as well. At that point, Mizuho finally confessed that she alone was responsible for everything. It turned out that Mizuho, Shizuka, and Kaoru had all grown up together in the same orphanage since childhood. The three of them had relied on one another and cared for each other like family. The day before Shizuka disappeared, the three girls had spoken on the phone together. During the conversation, Mizuho could sense the despair in Shizuka's voice, and she also heard Takuya's voice nearby. Then the very next day, Shizuka disappeared. Mizuho became convinced that Takuya was responsible for Shizuka's death, and once she imagined Shizuka suffering at his hands, she killed Takuya in a fit of rage. As for why she murdered Yusuk, the answer had actually already been hidden inside Shizuka's suicide letter. At the time, Shizuka and Yusuk were already in a relationship, but their happiness didn't last long. Soon afterward, Shizuka was diagnosed with a terminal illness. She only had about 2 weeks left to live. Not wanting to burden Yusuk, Shizuka chose to end her own life. Although there was nothing strange about the letter itself, Mizuho became convinced there was more to the story, so she went to investigate Shizuka's hospital records. And there, she discovered something shocking. On the night before Shizuka's suicide, She had gone to see Yusuke at the hospital where he worked as a doctor, but Yusuke had refused to meet with her. Because of that, Mizuho became convinced that Yusuke had played with Shizuka's feelings and abandoned her, driving her to suicide. But just then, Kujiro suddenly revealed a truth that stunned everyone present. It turned out that Yusuke had known about Shizuka's illness from the very beginning. He understood better than anyone that she didn't have much time left, and that was exactly why he refused to see her at the hospital that day. But later that same night, Kujiro saw his older brother leave while carrying a ring with him, determined to go find Shizuka, because Yusuke truly loved her, even if it meant giving up everything. Even if Shizuka only had a short time left to live, he still wanted to marry her. Hearing this, Mizuho's face filled with shock, because only now did she finally understand why Yusuke had said before his death that he could finally be with Shizuka forever. The realization instantly overwhelmed Mizuho with crushing guilt. She deeply regretted everything she had done. She never imagined that in trying to avenge Shizuka, she had actually killed the one man who truly loved her. But by then, it was already far too late. All that remained for her now was to face the judgment of the law.